Newark Airport has become a symbol in the aviation world, but not for positive reasons. Rather because of its consistently worse performance that is reflected everywhere, from FAA's annual on-time performance rankings to surveys and indexes from Wall Street Journal, AirHelp, and J.D. Power. And this is not just an opinion but a data-driven reality, because when you look at FAA's rankings of 30 major airports from 2015 to 2020, Newark is always at the bottom, third to last in 2015, dead last in 2016, and 2017, slightly improving to second to last in the following 2 years, only to fall back to last place in 2020, and when in 2024 its ranking improved slightly to 17th, the improvement was not because Newark actually got better, but rather because other airports got worse, which clearly shows that Newark is a structurally flawed airport that never consistently performs well. And when you compare its rankings with qualitative and quantitative indexes like Wall Street Journal's 2023 Large Airport Survey, AirHelp's 2025 Global Index, and J.D. Power's 2024 North American Satisfaction Study, all three unanimously rank Newark as America's worst airport, which proves that beyond on-time performance, in every parameter like customer experience, infrastructure, cleanliness, accessibility, security, wait times, food, and amenities, Newark fails badly, and this level of consistency only indicates one thing: that there is something fundamentally flawed in the design and structure of this airport, which has never been addressed for decades and cannot easily be expanded either, because in a densely packed metropolitan region like New York, both land limitation and political bureaucracy make expansion extremely difficult. If we look at performance seasonally, the pattern becomes even clearer, where October and March are comparatively smooth months with on-time rankings reaching 15th or 18th, but June and July are catastrophic, where only about 62 to 65% of flights are on time, which is a disastrous level of delay. And the reason is regional weather driven by the Appalachian Mountains geography, because moist warm air coming from the Gulf of Mexico rides the prevailing west to east winds, gets lifted by the Appalachians, and cools, forming clouds that, when interacting with the Atlantic sea breeze over New York, create thunderstorms, and thunderstorms are the worst possible weather phenomenon for airports because while snow, fog, or rain still allow partial operations, thunderstorms shut down everything due to unpredictable wind shifts and lightning, which forces airports like Newark to immediately stop ramp operations, baggage handling, fueling, pushback, everything, and even a 20-minute stop translates into cascading delays where inbound flights are forced to hold, outbound flights line up on the runway waiting, and a chain reaction begins that disrupts entire airline schedules, which is why in the summer months meltdown is almost routine for Newark, while JFK and LaGuardia manage slightly better, because JFK's location eastward on Jamaica Bay moderate storm intensity with cooler sea breeze. But the real difference becomes clear when we compare the layouts and size of these airports, because Newark's layout is both flawed and constrained, where despite having 3 runways, the parallel runways are only 950 feet apart, which by FAA standards is too close to allow independent operations. So the theoretical capacity of 3 runways is never actually achieved, and since the crosswind runway also intersects with the 2 mains, at any time only 2 runways can realistically be used, and even they come with restrictions that create an effective capacity lower than that of a normal 2-runway airport. Whereas JFK's parallel runways are thousands of feet apart and allow fully independent simultaneous operations, making them much more efficient at handling traffic. On the ground, Newark's design flaws amplify delays further, because in the most common landing pattern, when aircraft arrive from the north to land on the east runway, they then have to cross an active runway to reach the terminals located on the west side, which directly conflicts with departure flows and creates taxiway bottlenecks where every inbound aircraft is delayed by several minutes, and when finally reaching the terminal, gate limitations and tight scheduling make the problem worse. Because Newark has no surplus gate capacity, and even a small disruption forces inbound aircraft to wait on the taxiway for hours, as happened on July 14, 2025, when a United Airlines 767 arriving from Naples was stuck for 4 hours and 21 minutes due to no available gate, and this delay forced cancellation of the return flight, which ruined the plans of hundreds of passengers and became a textbook example of cascading disruption. This was not just a one-day freak event, but a pattern that repeats every year, and FAA's month-to-month rankings clearly show that Newark's operations remain relatively stable in spring and fall but collapse under weather pressure in summer, leading to predictable meltdowns. And when this structural weakness combines with air traffic control problems, the situation gets even worse because the complexity of New York airspace is at the highest level in the world, where Newark, JFK, and LaGuardia operate alongside Teterboro, which handles one of the busiest private jet volumes globally, plus Manhattan's constant helicopter traffic, sightseeing flights, commuter shuttles, wealthy residents' private flights to the Hamptons and Westchester, seaplanes on the East River, and general aviation in the Hudson Corridor all share the same congested airspace, demanding extreme concentration from controllers whose job is already among the most stressful. When FAA attempted to solve chronic staffing shortages by moving Newark's TRACON controllers to Philadelphia, the outcome backfired badly, because while the expectation was that lower cost of living and higher pay would attract more staff, in reality, only about half the experienced controllers from the Long Island City facility agreed to move, and even after forcing transfers, only 24 trained controllers were available against the required 63, and on top of this, the Philadelphia facility depended on a radar feed transmitted through an old copper telecom wire without redundancy, which glitched multiple times and caused blackouts where controllers lost radar screens for up to 90 seconds, a near disaster in such congested airspace where even 1 minute without radar could cause a catastrophic accident. And these blackouts became headline news, traumatized controllers, and pushed many of them onto leave, which worsened the shortage even further. And then when one of Newark's main runways closed for maintenance, right as the thunderstorm season began in May 2025, the airport's operations collapsed so badly it made international headlines. The bottom line of all of this is simple. Newark is an outdated and overstressed piece of infrastructure never designed to handle today's demand, and even the smallest problem escalates into a system-wide meltdown. And in the middle of all this frustration and analysis, the mention of aviation education and STEM learning comes in with platforms like Brilliant that provide interactive bite-sized lessons, helping people develop logical and scientific thinking in a structured way. But Newark Airport's problems are not just limited to weather or runway configuration. In reality, its entire operational ecosystem creates a domino effect where even a small delay turns into a chain reaction, impacting hundreds of flights and thousands of passengers. On a typical day, if one aircraft lands late, it gets stuck on already congested taxiways, then the gate isn't available, which delays the next departure, which forces another incoming aircraft to hold, and this cascading delay keeps multiplying throughout the day. And that is exactly why Newark stats are consistently the worst. Because while other airports can absorb small disruptions, Newark's flawed design and operational rigidity turn that small hiccup into a full-blown meltdown. And the biggest irony is that airlines, especially United Airlines, which dominates Newark's operations, are heavily dependent on it and cannot relocate their hub because they've invested billions, and abandoning the New York metropolitan market is economically impossible. But this dependency means airlines are stuck with an impossible puzzle every day, patching up delays with band-aid solutions while passengers bear the brunt of endless inconvenience. From the passenger's perspective, Newark consistently ranks worst not just in delays, but also in facilities, cleanliness, customer service, and crowd management. And every survey, whether from J.D. Power, AirHelp, or the Wall Street Journal, places it at the bottom, not as an isolated coincidence, but as the common conclusion of multiple independent assessments which establish an undeniable reality. For travelers, the worst part is that delays don't just mean being stuck at the airport, but also missed connections, canceled vacations, lost business deals, and ruined personal plans. And while each individual story feels like a small personal tragedy, when multiplied by thousands, it paints a picture of systemic failure that makes Newark infamous as a case study in dysfunction. The controller staffing crisis has made the situation even more dangerous, because when the Philadelphia facility was merged and outdated copper wire radar systems failed, controllers were literally blind and had to rely on manual vectoring and timing to narrowly avoid a potential disaster. But that trauma pushed many experienced controllers out of the system, leaving the rest overworked, exhausted, and vulnerable to burnout, which multiplies the risk of human error and creates a ticking time bomb where one small slip could cause a major tragedy. And when FAA reports openly acknowledge that Newark's TRACON is suffering from both staffing shortages and system reliability issues, it's clear this is not just a local inconvenience but a national aviation safety weak point that could make headlines at any moment. Compared globally to airports like London Heathrow, Hong Kong Chek Lap Kok, or Dubai International, places that face equally tough traffic and weather challenges, Newark lags far behind. because those airports modernized infrastructure and streamlined operations to make delays manageable, while Newark, stuck with outdated and congested structures, is fundamentally unequipped to handle modern traffic volumes. And the biggest proof of that is how the FAA and airlines have tried every possible band-aid fix but have never solved the underlying flaws of design and location, and caught in the middle of all this, the average passenger is left only with frustration, wasted time, and ruined plans, making Newark not just an airport but a symbol of systemic negligence. One of the clearest indicators of Newark's dysfunction lies in its statistics. Because year after year, the airport ranks at or near the bottom of on-time performance in the United States, with thousands of flights delayed annually. Due to congestion, outdated runways, and airspace conflicts with nearby airports like JFK and LaGuardia, and what makes matters worse is that Newark's location in one of the busiest air corridors in the world amplifies every small disruption into a massive cascade of delays that ripple across the entire country. So a thunderstorm in New Jersey doesn't just ruin Newark's schedule, but also affects flights nationwide, which infuriates passengers who cannot understand why one airport's inefficiencies have to ruin travel plans in Los Angeles, Chicago, or Miami. And the problem is not just weather, it's structural, because Newark's runways intersect in a way that limits simultaneous takeoffs and landings, meaning traffic bottlenecks are inevitable even in clear skies. Experts have long warned that without a complete redesign of the airspace and investment in new runway configurations, Newark will remain incapable of handling its traffic load, but political realities and land use restrictions make such radical solutions unlikely, leaving travelers stuck with the same broken system. To make things worse, airline consolidation has concentrated Newark's traffic heavily around United Airlines, turning it into a fortress hub where options for passengers are limited, and when disruptions occur, travelers often find themselves with no alternatives or rerouting possibilities, compounding the frustration. The end result is an airport that feels like a trap, unavoidable, inefficient, and despised, where every step of the journey, from security lines to boarding to baggage claim, reminds passengers of how far behind Newark has fallen compared to the global standard, and until real structural changes are made, it will remain less an international gateway and more a cautionary tale of how not to run a modern airport. Another dimension of Newark's failure that rarely gets enough attention is the passenger experience inside the terminal itself. Because unlike airports that try to compensate for operational inefficiencies with better amenities, Newark often feels like a relic from a darker era of air travel, where comfort and efficiency are afterthoughts, and travelers are treated more like burdens than valued customers, with cramped waiting areas, outdated signage, and an overall atmosphere of stress that begins the moment you step through the doors. Security checkpoints are notorious for long lines that snake endlessly due to poor layout and insufficient staffing, and even when additional TSA lanes are added, the underlying chaos of the design prevents smooth flow, creating a perception of disorganization that undermines confidence. Once inside the terminal, passengers encounter a patchwork of restaurants and shops that are either closed, overpriced, or so crowded that finding a seat becomes a victory in itself, and the food offerings, while slowly improving, remain far behind airports like Singapore's Changi or even domestic rivals such as Dallas-Fort Worth, where dining is part of the experience rather than another source of irritation. Bathrooms are often dirty, poorly maintained, and too few for the volume of traffic, forcing long waits that only add to the sense of neglect. And when basic facilities cannot meet passenger needs, the entire airport experience collapses into frustration. Technology has also been implemented unevenly, because while some gates have modern self-check kiosks or USB charging ports, others still look like they belong to the 1980s, with broken equipment and limited seating, leaving travelers to wonder if they are in the same airport. Boarding processes are further complicated by cramped gate areas where multiple flights compete for space, so announcements overlap, passengers crowd around podiums, and any semblance of order dissolves, making delays feel inevitable even before takeoff. The cumulative effect of these conditions is not just inconvenience but an erosion of trust, because passengers come to expect Newark to fail them at every stage, from check-in to baggage claim, and once that reputation becomes ingrained, it is nearly impossible to change, no matter how many billions are spent on renovation beyond passenger discomfort. Newark's failures ripple into the broader economy in ways that are both immediate and long-term, because delays and inefficiencies at such a major hub create cascading disruptions that extend far beyond New Jersey and New York, affecting national and even global air traffic. When a single runway closes due to maintenance or weather, flights across the entire United States often experience delays, as aircraft stuck at Newark cannot reposition to other airports on time, causing a domino effect that paralyzes schedules coast to coast. Businesses that rely on timely shipping of goods, whether medical supplies, electronics, or perishable foods, face significant costs when cargo is delayed or rerouted, leading to financial losses that can run into millions within hours. For travelers, missed connections mean canceled meetings, lost deals, and wasted days, which accumulate into a measurable economic drain, particularly in a region as commercially vital as the New York metropolitan area. Local tourism also suffers, because international visitors who endure a negative experience at Newark often leave with the impression that the city and country are disorganized, making them less likely to return or recommend the destination to others. Airlines themselves face massive financial burdens, as fuel burned idling on tarmacs, compensation for stranded passengers, and logistical headaches of rebooking stretch already thin profit margins. The Federal Aviation Administration spends considerable resources trying to manage Newark's inefficiencies, from extra staffing in air traffic control to constant adjustments in scheduling, resources that could otherwise be allocated to improving safety or technology across the aviation system. Even infrastructure investments at Newark, which are meant to modernize the facility, frequently come in over budget and behind schedule, as political infighting and contractor mismanagement mirror the very dysfunction they are supposed to fix, further deepening public cynicism. Over decades, the airport has become a symbol not only of transportation failure but of institutional inability to adapt, reflecting broader societal frustrations with bureaucracy, inefficiency, and the sense that despite enormous wealth and technological capability, basic systems still falter under pressure, ultimately. Newark's story is less about one airport's chronic dysfunction and more about the failure of vision in how infrastructure is imagined, built, and maintained in the United States. Because what was once intended as a shining gateway to one of the most important metropolitan regions in the world has instead become a cautionary tale about what happens when short-term fixes replace long-term strategy, when political interests outweigh engineering logic, and when passenger needs are treated as secondary to bureaucratic convenience. Every attempt to patch the system, whether through terminal renovations, new security lanes, or reconfigured traffic flows, has been undone by the sheer scale of the underlying problems, which require a complete rethinking rather than incremental tinkering. True reform would demand not only massive financial investment, but also political courage, coordination across agencies, and a cultural shift toward valuing efficiency, comfort, and reliability as much as profit and cost-cutting. Until then, Newark will remain what it has been for decades, a choke point in the global air network, a stress test for anyone attempting to fly in or out of the New York region, and a reminder that modern air travel's promise of speed and connection can just as easily collapse into chaos and frustration. For millions of passengers each year, Newark is not just an airport but an ordeal, a place where every small failure, late arrivals, broken escalators, dirty bathrooms, endless lines, adds up to an overwhelming sense of dysfunction, and yet, despite all the criticism, it continues to operate at full capacity, proof of how deeply entrenched the system is and how dependent the region has become on an airport that consistently fails to meet the standards of a world-class hub. The tragedy of Newark is that it could have been different. With foresight, bold planning, and accountability, it might have stood as a symbol of American ingenuity, but instead it endures as a monument to missed opportunities, a living case study of how neglect and mismanagement can doom even the most vital infrastructure.